have any reactions afterwards, if you think we should do things like this again in the future, let us know. That would be really helpful. Or if you think we shouldn't do anything like this again in the future, let us know that too. That would be great. I want to thank the people who are involved in preparing for this today, especially Don Coomer. I'll introduce him a little bit later. He's the speaker. And Mike Nolan, who made all kinds of display items around the museum. They're scattered around the museum. There are approximately, what, 50? 32, okay, I was exaggerating a little bit. But we have a list of those. If you want a list of those and see if you can find all 32, that would be kind of fun. And that list is at the, in case you don't already have one, that list is at the front desk. I want to thank him then for doing that, and Pam for helping him on that, and also Pam and people who helped her in preparing the tea and crumpets. So afterwards, stick around and enjoy some tea and crumpets as well. So today we're going to be focusing on the, oh, and there are a few other people I should mention. Roger Fisher, Tim Robbins, Linda Mickelson, lots of people have helped prepare for this. So the Great Fire of London, 1666. We actually talk about that when we give our tours here, and so doing that as a special event, getting a lot of additional information about the fire is really wonderful for the museum and what we try to do here. The speaker is Don Coomer. He's a retired firefighter from the Louisville Fire Department. He was there with them for 29 and a half years. At the rank of captain, was a fire company commander. He's a native of Louisville, married. Yvelle is his wife's name. Has 3 children, Nicole, Chad, and Brad. 4 grandchildren, and we are absolutely delighted that he agreed to do this. So please welcome Don Cooper.
Hello everybody, how y'all doing today on Sunday? Glad to see all the non-basketball fans here today. Well, let's talk about the Great Fire of London in 1666. What I've done, I've broken this up into 6 segments, and we're going to talk about what was going on in the UK and London before the fire. We're going to be talking about some of the players that were involved in the fire, some of the decision makers. We're going to be talking about the fire itself. Now, I'm not going to be talking that much about firefighting. I'm going to be talking about more what was going on behind the scenes. Now, you have a handout as a graph, and it shows you some of the structures that were in the line of the fire. So as we talk through this, you can see on what day and where the fire was. We're going to talk about the aftermath. There was a lot of things going on right after it, and then there's things going on for years and years after the fire. Then we're going to talk about the monument that was built. Does everybody have one?
Yes, anybody that doesn't have one of these maps.
Okay, and then we're going to talk about the walls. So let's talk about before the fire. London was the 3rd largest city in the world, and a population estimated between 300 and 400,000. Unfortunately, in the 1600s, there were no government census, and government census did not start until early 1800s in England. So it's anybody's guess. It's whoever you might read an article about. They might say the population was 300,000, 350, 400,000. So that's the reason there's almost a 1/3 difference in what the population was estimated at. It was a hub of manufacturing. It was a large distribution center. It had very large markets. It was a very large consumer. It had a very, very large port. Also, they were at war with the Dutch and the French, which, you know, kind of dragging down their economy a little bit. In 1665, why don't we just throw in the bubonic plague? The plague only killed 1 in 5 people in London. 1 week they recorded over 7,100 deaths. take the year just 1666. 666, a sign of the beast. This let the mystics and the prophets come out of the walls. In fact, they came out of the walls for certainly 1640, predicting doom and gloom. And we might as well throw in a fiery comet that came back twice the year before. We had 2 eclipses of the moon and 1 partial eclipse of the sun. There was no organized fire brigades in 1666. Basically, firefighting was an on-the-job learning. It was just able-bodied people that showed up. How they were called to the churches where everything was kept was that they would ring the bells backwards. So they go ding dong, they would ring the bells dong, ding dong, ding. And you would hear it, and you would go to the church and you would find firefighting equipment that was there. The basic firefighting tool was the fire bucket, because everything, appliances that were used, all required water. There was some water mains, but one of them actually burned up early in the fire, another one wasn't very useful at all. You had to have very large bucket brigades. The main water supply was the Thames River. So if you were a quarter of a mile or even farther away and you needed water, you're going to do it with a bucket brigade and a lot of people. You also had fire squirts that were kept in the churches. They were like a hypodermic needle. You take it and put them down into a bucket, and you pull the water up, and then you would aim it at the fire, and you squirt 6 pints of water. But you had to have the buckets that you see here. In my opinion, the best firefighting tool was the fire bucket. They came in various sizes, maybe 6 feet, they went up to 30 feet, to 30-foot ones had ropes. They would use them to tear down buildings. This would make a fire break, like you would make a fire break in a forest fire. And this picture, we all kind of like. We see people with their buckets are throwing the water on the fire. I'm not really sure they would climb up the flame of the fire and throw water buckets on it. But you can see them with the fire hook, they're trying to pull down the building, but then you got a holy guy here praying that it all works out. They did have fire pumpers. They had 5 of them. Took 28 horses, or took 28 men or 8 horses to move these things. They were on sleds. Never could come up with a good reason why they were on sleds, but the thing is, because some of the streets were so narrow, putting wheels on them would cause issues in going down some of these narrow streets. Now, this isn't the right depiction of the type of pumpers, but they had 2 handles, one on each end, like our 1756 pumper here. It would have to be filled up by a bucket, a bucket brigade. Every time you did a pump, you got 6 pints of water. We did talk about waterworks. The waterworks was on the north end, far end of the London Bridge. It was also just a few blocks from Pudding Lane when the fire started, and it was consumed pretty early in the fire. Okay, we've had comments and everything. We also had a drought in 1666. Everything dried out. The main building materials at that time was wood and thatch. About imagine how they would dry out in a heat wave. And also they had tar and pitch, which they used to waterproof the buildings. The structures of the cities were also an issue. Houses were very close together. The streets were very narrow. Everything was wood, thatch, tar, and pitch. It was said more than once that you could go to the second floor of your house, you could open up your windows, and you could reach across the street and shake hands with your neighbors. And the only other thing I could think that was going back at the time was the night of the fire, the winds were blowing between 50 and 60 miles an hour gale force. The outer radius started toppling the chimneys, and they were blowing off the roofs. Let's talk about the players. Number 1 player, King Charles II. King Charles I, his brother, was executed during the English Civil War a number of years earlier. Just a few years before the fire, he came back and took the crown. He was known as the Merry King. He believed in religious freedom. The people liked him. a lot of theaters had been closed. He opened up the theaters. His right-hand man was his brother, Duke of York. Depending on where he was king, he was either King James the VII or the II. But he was the right-hand guy, he was the cheerleader, and when need be, he became sergeant major, if you understand what I'm trying to say about a sergeant major. Why we probably know so much about the London fires because of this man, Samuel Pepys. He was a military administrator, but he kept the diary. His diary was really, really easy to read, or maybe it wasn't. But anyway, Mike Nolan has got a copy in English over there, so when you're done, you might want to go over and look at that. But his diary is the holy grail of the London fire. Thursday night, a gentleman asked me, well, why come we don't know so much about other fires and other catastrophes? Because about every city had a catastrophe. I was just recently in Lisbon in the early 1700s. They had an 9.5 earthquake, then they had a tidal wave, and then they had a fire on the same day. But they didn't have Samuel Pepys writing everything down, so I think that's why we know a lot about this. Then we had a baker, Thomas Beverton. He was the king's baker, and he was on Pudding Lane. And the reason he was the king's baker was that he made hardtack, a really hard biscuit for the Navy. We have Sir Thomas Bloodworth. He was the mayor at the time. Not really a good mayor, and he kind of went down in history with one statement. We had Patience Ward. He was the mayor for several years, a number of years after the fire, and was involved in the monument. And we had Sir Christopher Wren. He was the architect, the person that helped rebuild London after the fire. And then we have Robert Hoover. You say he was a victim of the fire. We'll learn a little bit more about him. But those are basically the players that I will be speaking about today. So let's talk about the fire. Talking about the fire in London is a little bit like talking about the Titanic. Okay? Titanic sunk, London burned. So anyway, the fire started on Pudding Lane. Pudding Lane was only about 100 yards long. Pudding is a medieval term for guts and entrails. And butchers had acquired a scalding house on this lane, and they would send their pudding down the gutters to the Thames. Therefore, it was called Pudding Lane. And on Saturday, September 1st, Thomas closed his bakery around about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. He raked out all the coals out of his ovens, made sure the fire was out, and he loaded it back up with wood for the next day's work. He went upstairs to the second floor and he went to bed. About an hour later, his daughter Hannah came down. She checked on the bakery. Everything was good. She went back upstairs. Short time later, the manservant that lived with him couldn't go down the steps. There was so much fire and smoke going. He went back upstairs. He woke up Thomas, Hannah, and the maid that lived with them. And now they're trapped on the second floor of the house in the bakery. Their only escape was through a window. And so they shimmied across the roof line and went to the next balcony. Unfortunately, the maid was scared of heights, and she became the first victim of the London fire. Fire now was headed towards the Thames, the banks. The Thames, it was like I said, it was a port. It had a lot of open yards with flammable materials, a lot of warehouses with flammable materials. The Lord Mayor, or Thomas Bloodworth, when he was called, he showed up immediately. When he showed up, he was terrified of what he was seeing. Got to stop and remember, people, thatch roofs, 50-mile-an-hour winds, flames, sparks, and everything's going everywhere. People started pushing him to tear down buildings. The law would not allow that. The law at the time was that if you tore down a building, you became responsible for rebuilding it. So the only people that could give permission to tear down a building was the owner. At this time in London, some 80% of the shops and homes were rented, and wherever the was anybody's guess. He was pressed several times to reconsider. This time he made his famous statement. I'm not going to line it out. I'm going to kind of sugarcoat it a little bit, but you'll understand what he said. He said, any woman with a full bladder can put the fire out. And with that said, he went home, he went to bed, and he went into a place of history. Now, he came back several more times before the issue of tearing down the buildings was resolved. He made some other statements, not as famous as that one, and he went home and went back to bed. The fourth time when he came back, that had been resolved, and now he was tearing down buildings left and right, left and right. Meanwhile, the citizens were moving their possessions. In a normal fire, where maybe one house was on fire, the procedure, the policy was that you just gather up your belongings and you move them over 2 or 3 streets. And when the fire was out, you come back. 50, 60 mile an hour winds, you move your stuff 2 or 3 blocks over, then you move your stuff 2 or 3 more blocks over, and it just kept going like that. The sick was moved in their beds. Okay, also on Sunday, King Charles II and James, they viewed the fire from 12 on foot, and they also viewed it from the Thames in a boat. And they decided at this point in time, it was time to send troops in to help fight the fire. Monday morning, the skies are said to be red where the sun's shining through. Hopefully maybe a far engine red, but the rest of the sun was blocked out. They started wanting somebody to blame. Now remember, they're at war with the Dutch and the French. Human nature, you're always looking to blame somebody. So there was a lot of beatings reported. There was some lynchings reported. There was some looting reported. One citizen, in fact, in the haste of wanting to move his stuff, hearts and quarters, he never saw his stuff again. There was no banks, so if you had money, it was probably in a bag or in a chest in your house. And if you lost it all, I think the last thing you would want to do is be broke and then you live. A lot of people this time are now burying their belongings and their papers, cheese, or vats of wine being placed in the ground, hoping that burying them would help protect them. On a late afternoon of Monday or Monday evening, the Romel's Change Firm. This building housed all levels of merchants. You had merchants that dealt in import-export, and then you had a common merchant that just wanted to sell his wares. The fire at this time had covered several hundred acres. The fire didn't move south because the London Bridge had burnt in 1633. At the time when the London Bridge was built, it actually had houses on it. There was a fire in 1633 that burnt not a few of the houses on the north end of the building. This made a fire break. Now, it's taught by the waterworks early, was rebuilt, and another house was built there, but that also was burnt early in the fire, so they had a nice wide fire break. And therefore, the fire didn't jump to Thames. This is a picture that I really like a lot. Now, all this in this picture that was probably painted years later didn't happen at the same time, but you can see the people moving down to the Thames, trying to load, rent boats, get their stuff across the Thames. You can see the London Bridge over here with the gap, and we're pretty sure somewhat in the center is St. Paul's Cathedral, but also fire. So we like this picture. The original picture shows a lot of sparks and embers flying in the sky. So anyway, the king finally decided that there was a lot of chaos going on. There was very little firefighting going on. So he appointed his brother, the Duke of York, to take control. He had a plan. His plan was to put 5 fire posts around the city. He ordered the constables at the churches to bring with them 100 men. I'm not sure 100 people would show up, because if you talk about 500 people, London is still burning and the fire is still moving pretty fast. but he also ordered 30 soldiers in with an officer. There was 3 other posts put up, and they were manned by gentlemen, because this gave a good example. But what this did was that the commanders of these posts now had permission, or could get permission to tear down the buildings. But still, you had to get permission from one of these people. So if you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 blocks away from them, you would send a runner asking permission to tear down a specific building. Sometimes they would even send letters. And then Tuesday, the fire was still moving. On Tuesday, like I said earlier, smoke over the city was drowning out the sun and the sky. It was also noted on this day, on Tuesday, that both the king and the duke were seen ankle-deep in water fighting the fire. Also on Tuesday, St. Paul's Cathedral caught on fire. Also caught on fire in 1087. It only took 250 years to rebuild it after that fire. It was some 585 feet in length and 489 feet high. In hours leading up to the fire, and catching fire, people were moving their possessions into the building because it was made of stone. And they thought this would protect their possessions. There was wood scaffolding at the top. The roof of the building was made of lead. Quite obviously, we think the scaffolding got caught on fire by the embers. The lead melted. It fell down into the cathedral, caused a very large explosion. How much lead was there? There was actually a report of lead going down the gutters of a nearby street. When the roof did cave in, as you can see, people started bringing their stuff out. Now, I don't know if you all have ever been in churches in England. They're full of a lot of altars, they're full of a lot of pews, they're full of a lot of tombs, and they're full of a lot of crypts. And when the roof caved in, this broke open the crypts and exposed their contents. Some of them were so well preserved that they were put on display until 1675. And actually, the king went by and checked them out. So, but anyway, Tuesday evening is coming to an end. 2 major things happened Tuesday evening. They started using gunpowder to burn down homes. They weren't using the fireworks as much. And around 11 p.m., the wind died down. Wednesday morning, the people's attitudes changed. People now were moving, in a sense, their minds were moving from not wanting to save their possessions, but to start firefighting. James and other persons started arresting everybody they could find into firefighting. The ones that went willingly was really nice, and the others were, let's just say, persuaded to start firefighting. By Wednesday afternoon, it was obvious the struggle to save the city was over. There was still a lot of hot spots here and there, but with the winds dying down, everybody pretty well thought they had the fire under control. The fire moved about 30 yards per hour going west and northwest. It only moved 7 yards per hour going east, and that's due to the winds. And that's basically the reason why the fire didn't move east. And a 7 yard per hour fire was very manageable at that time. But by the end of it, the Wednesday afternoon, there were 70 to 80,000 people that were homeless. Let's talk a little bit about the aftermath. There was a large exodus from the city. People were still moving out. One description of the exodus was this: those that had a house today were the next glad to shelter of a hedge or a pigsty or a stable. Another description was that those that were this day riding wantonly in coaches were the next glad to ride in dung carts to save their own lives. They started putting people, when people started leaving the city, they had to have someplace to go. The king decided to put them in a place called Morrisville. It was L-shaped, it was some 22 acres. It did not have the best reputation going to start with, but they pushed people into there. The king's #1 concern, when you get a lot of desperate people in one place, something's going to go wrong. There's going to be a mob, and quite obviously a mob did form. What their intent was, they were going to go out and try to find the French or the Dutch or whoever was causing the fire. Of course, they were going to be fighting a ghost person. The king knew this was going to happen. He quickly sent troops in to resolve this issue. And the next day, he actually came to Millersfield, and he told the people that the fire was an accident, and that, you know, there was no Dutch and there was no French, you know, doing preemptive strike on it. Other issues popped up real quick. All your shops, your bakeries, your breweries, and everything just burned up. People that ran, the ones that did, took their stuff and left, so you had a food supply issue almost instantly. King also saw this, and he set up food distribution points for bread around the city very quickly. Price gouging was another issue that cropped up. If you rented a house before the fire, you probably rented for around 40 pounds per year. After the fire, 150 pounds per year. Let's talk about Robert Hubert. Robert was a 26-year-old Frenchman who said he was a watchmaker. Like any foreigners wandering around in London after the fire, he was stopped and questioned. When he was questioned, did you have anything to do with the fire? He blurted out, yes, I'm a member of a group called the Gang of 24. We landed in London to throw fireballs and create havoc. There was no witnesses to anything that he said. In fact, during the process of his trial and everything, they took him to putting lighting on him right to where the bakery was. But unfortunately, the captain told the court that he didn't get off the ship for 2 to 3 days after the fire. And then, like anybody else being a tourist, he went to putting light to see where the fire had started. But unfortunately, at his trial, he made no attempt to show any remorse. He changed his story several times, and he gave no statements whatsoever in his defense. So, on October 27, 1666, they hung him. Now we got some rebuilding going, because we just burned down Greywater City. In September, a royal proclamation was published establishing some rules to rebuild the church and rebuild the city. In all, there were 6 rebuilding acts. These acts were in power for over the next 50 years. Some of the rules included buildings would be made of brick and stone, streets would be widened, to prevent the fires from jumping from one side to the other side. And now, the issue of raising funds to pay for all this. Well, you just can't tax the people that just lost their houses and their businesses, but London being a big importer of coal is a good thing to tax. So at a shilling per imperial ton, that's where the money came for the rebuilding of London. Temporary buildings were immediately put up in place. The ones that burnt down, they were ill-equipped, disease moved rapidly through, and yeah, they had a drought, they had comets, and now they had one of the worst winters they could possibly have in 1666. That year, a lot of people died. Rebuilding actually got going in 1667, with only a few hundred houses being built, 1,500 houses being rebuilt. Doesn't sound like a lot, but now they're going to be brick or stone. So the brick and stone people have got to rev up their business to supply this. And by the 1670, there were 6,000 homes rebuilt, and by the mid part of the 1670s, that century, that decade, almost all the houses were rebuilt. Parliament passed an act to create special fire courts. These courts were set up to determine who would be best to rebuild on these sites, who would have the money, and who was still responsible, because we still had this law. If you tore it down, you were responsible, or even if it burned down, you weren't responsible for the fire. You were still responsible for rebuilding the structure. What they would do is that if I was paying £50 a year to rent my shop. I had to rebuild a shop. What they might do is reduce my yearly rent to 30 or 40 pounds. I had a 10-year lease, then they might give me a 20-year lease. So there was a lot of deals going on like that. In the early days of the fire courts, some 14 judges heard over 800 cases. And this is one thing I like. In the 17th century, as in the 21st century, litigation was the devil's work. Claims heard under civil law routinely involved lots of money, lengthy delays, complications of very large proportions. Then as now, the only sure winner was the lawyers. The merchants moved back into the Royal Exchange in September 1666. A building permit was issued in 1675 to rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral. It was completed in 1711. Okay? The task of designing, rebuilding, living, and designing a lot of the structures was Christopher Wren. He was responsible alone for 50 of the churches that were rebuilt. The last building to be rebuilt was the Tower of St. Michael Cornhill in 1722. There were a number of poems published 12 months after the fire. I think it's later it said she could write some poems. I'm just going to recite 4 or 5 of them to you, but I figure I'd just give you one out like the best, okay? So, in 1666, London worked like rotten sticks. So let's talk about the monument. Okay, at the time the monument was being made and everything, the mayor was Patient Ward. He was very anti-immigrant, he was very anti-Catholic, and he had a plaque placed on a building that was said to be where Thomas's Bakery was. And on this plaque was this: hereby ye permission of heaven, hell broke loose upon this Protestant city from the malicious hearts of barbarous papists. By ye hand of their agent who confessed, and on ye runs of this place declared fact for which he was hanged. That being the beginning of the dreadful fire which is described and perpetuated on and by the neighboring pillar, which was the monument. Fortunately, a number of years later, this plaque was taken down. The monument itself was approved in 1671. It took another 6 years to build it. The pillar cost 13,450 pounds. It is shaped in the form of a fluted column on a square pedestal with a square viewing platform at the top. The crown is by a drum, a little dome, and finally a flaming urn of gilded bronze. The column is hollow. It has 311 steps in it. Today you can still go up to the observation deck and look at it. And it is said to be 202 feet from where Thomas had his baby. Now the base of it, 3 of the sides are in Latin. And I'm not going to read it to you in Latin at all, because the only foreign language I took in high school was English, okay? But I'll tell you what is on it. On the north side panel, it records the story of the city destruction. On the south panel, focused on the rebuilding, the actions of the king, parliament, and the fire court. The east panel was a name checklist of everybody that was involved in it, the mayors, the lords, the kings, and etc. in the rebuilding. The fourth panel, this one here, was carved by a Danish artist in portrays London as a strong lady right here. So we start focusing there, I'll describe what's going on. She lies on a pile of broken masonry, exhausted, damaged, her head drooping down. When time is supporting her and helping her rise to her feet, with a female figure points with her scepter to the goddess of peace and plenty, who is above in the clouds. Houses are burning in the background, while a beehive, a symbol of industry, lies at London's feet. To the right of this group stands the King and the Duke of York, both in robes, dressed
in Roman dress and liberty is followed. Justice and fortitude looks on, and the new urban landscape takes effect. And that is what it looks like today. Well, let's close this up by talking about the loss. 13,200 homes were lost on 400 streets and courts. Like I said earlier, 70 to 80,000 people lost their homes. Total is some 463 acres were scorched. 86 churches were either badly damaged or completely destroyed. 35 of these churches will never be rebuilt, and it would take more than half a century to replace the other ones. The total cost of the fire was £10 million, and today dollars that would be about $2 billion. The death toll is anybody's guess. A lot of people were fallen, a lot of people might have perished in the fire, maybe their bodies got cremated, maybe when the rubble was removed, their bodies might have been torn to pieces, or just simply lost, but the official death toll stands at 6. We know who one of those people are. Well, anyway, that concludes my presentation on the Great London Fire, but I also would like to thank Ann Peters for the desserts that we're going to have, tea and crumpets. I want to thank Mike Nolan for the displays that are around the museum. I want to thank Tim Robbins for my audio, and Roger Fisher for the video screen that he provided us. I think there's some books that are being handed out, and when you get one of these, one of the chapters addresses a ghost for the London Fire Brigade, and also another chapter addresses a firearm box in Lowell called the Fatal 48. There's booths around the museum, and if you'd like to drop a few dollars in, the museum would deeply appreciate it. And if I can, at this time, I'll be more than happy to answer some questions if I can. If not, we'll have tea and crumpets. Yes, ma'am. It was, the best of my knowledge, it was moved out to the countryside. Yeah, they couldn't put all the rubble that was there. They put it in the gyms. It would have blocked it for sure. There might very well be.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, the question was, where did all the rubble go to? And she thought, quite obviously, they didn't throw that into the Thames. And to the best of my knowledge, it was moved to the countryside. What happened to it after that? I really don't. Mike might know.
All the rubble was put where the buildings were, and they just built over the top of it and made it tall.
Okay.
A lot of the stuff that we have, some of the things we have are things that were found hundreds of years later, but they moved to remodel. Put new buildings and old buildings locations. So there's a lot of stuff that they found.
No, okay.
Back and digging into their locations.
So go around and look at some of these displays that we got. Anybody else? I'll send to you comments. Thank you all very much.
I'd like Mike to step up for a second, say just a word about the displays. And if there's anybody who would like a list of these displays that are scattered around the museum, we have a list that we can give you.
Most of the things that we have on display came from the London Museum, from their exhibit that was celebrating in 2016, an anniversary of the Fire of London. Some of the things we have in the back are artifacts that we assembled. They're not really artifacts. Nobody's going to send us stuff to put on display.
The other night, he called them artifacts.
But it gives you an idea of the things that they found, dug up, and other things. So I'll be here. If you're doing the list and you can't find something, let me know why.
Does anybody here want a list that doesn't have one already? All right. All right. There you are.
And I'll give one away since you can't get to it. Right over in this corner. the oak bed. Next to the bed. And the things are, as much as we could, we associate them with current items.
Thank you very much. Oh, you got a comment or question? Yeah.
That's my house.
Yes.
We have one right here, one.
Oh, yeah, that's the, yeah, the kids listen here, yeah. Okay, good. All right, tea and crumpets, let's enjoy. Thank you again for coming.
It's something that the museum.
Yes.
Really.
Ready for the tea? Come on. I'll tell you what. Are you gonna be here for
Can you help us do something?
I don't want to hold up the Thank you so much.